This week, we're continuing our extreme kitchen makeover and starting to add some of the finishing touches to our cabinets. I've been building these cabinets from scratch as a total beginner, and while it's been easier than I thought it would be, it's been taking what feels like forever. But we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and this space is starting to feel like a real functional kitchen. So come along this week while we build our doors and drawer fronts, choose a paint color, and bring our DIY kitchen design to life. I'm going to be creating shaker style doors and drawer fronts for my cabinets. I'll be using a table saw to create the grooves in the edge of each of my 1x3s to create the frames for my doors. To set up this table saw, I first adjusted the fence on the table saw over so that it was about 1/4 inch away from the blade. I had also already adjusted my blade depth to 1/4 inch so that the depth of that groove that I'm cutting is only 1/4 inch into the piece of wood. Then I stood the 1x3 up on edge to run it through the table saw, creating a groove that was 1/4 inch away from the edge of the piece of wood. Then I flipped the board around to cut the opposite side, still on the same edge, but this will give me 2 grooves that are 1/4 inch away from each edge on this one side of the framing. Next, I adjusted the fence so that I could cut out that extra little bit of wood in the center of those 2 grooves. And sometimes I had to do this twice to get it, but basically I've created a 1/4 inch deep by 1/4 inch wide groove in one side of this frame. I did this for all of my 1x3s before cutting them down to size for each of the frames. So yesterday when I was experimenting with cutting the tongues on the end of these rails, I have to always remember rails and stiles, I found that it was actually easier for me to do it on this side of the saw blade. And then I have this little thing here that I can slip in this groove, and when I line this up I can kind of cut and shift it and cut without having to adjust my thing. So I can kind of adjust it to the depth that I need my tongue to be, and then I can just kind of slide it back and forth pretty easily to cut the rest off. So yeah, that looks pretty good on that side. And then I'll just flip it over and do this side. I want to make sure that my saw blade depth is only cutting 1/4 inch, so the finished tongue should be 1/4 inch wide by 1/4 inch tall, and that fits into my 1/4 inch wide by 1/4 inch deep groove on the stile. Nice. I just want to lay these out real quick. Measure. Where's my paper? 15 13/16 should be the total width here. And we are at 15. Oh my gosh, that's like perfect. I'll cut the other rail on the ends to create the tongue, and then I will cut a piece of plywood to go in the center here. Once I had my technique dialed in, I went ahead and batch cut all of the rails and stiles. Trolling me, go on. Ah, no. This little bee is so interested in me right now. Quit, go away, go away, go away, God. Curious little thing. My top cabinet drawers are too narrow to do this shaker style, so I'm just cutting down a 1x6 to the height that I need it for the drawer, and it's just going to be a flat panel for those. I also went through and batch cut a bunch of the 1/4 inch plywood that I'm going to be using for the main panels of my drawer fronts and cabinet doors. After a little bit of trial and error, I realized that it's a best practice to dry fit each door and drawer front before gluing everything together, just to make sure that my measurements are just right and see if I need to make any small adjustments. I learned this the hard way when I basically ruined 3 panels because I tried to force them together when they weren't quite the right size, so these are kind of my little rejects. Once I was happy with the size of each panel, I could start gluing them together. I'm just adding glue in the ends of the stiles, and this is where the rails are going to attach, and I'm being very generous with the glue, but I don't want to glue where the 1/4 inch plywood is. That's not really necessary, and we need to let that plywood kind of expand and contract, even though it's okay if it gets a little bit of glue on it. And it's also okay if the glue is extra oozy. This is totally fine. Once I had everything glued, I just clamped it together to allow the glue to dry. And if everything is sized correctly, if you've been really careful with your measurements, then it really doesn't take much clamping pressure to hold this together. It's just to allow the glue to dry. All right, I've got all of the doors and drawer fronts assembled, and I need to do some finishing work on those before the final install. But before I do that, I just want to go ahead and install the door hardware and get them fit into the openings, do any adjustments that I need to do, because it's possible that I may need to kind of do some fine tuning, like, you know, skimming down an edge or even like adding a little bit to an edge with some Bondo or something. So I kind of just want to get them in the openings and get them adjusted just the way that I want them before I do the final finishing on these and before I paint them. So yesterday I created a little mock-up for the hinges here because these hinges did not come with instructions, and so I wasn't really sure exactly the clearances that I needed for everything. So I just kind of did a little door mock-up with one of the pieces that I messed up. And I think I've got it kind of figured out. The type of door mount that I need is an inset flush mount with a face frame. They make special hinges for a face frame and an inset mount of a door. I didn't like those hinges. I didn't like the way they looked. I thought they looked a little too clunky. So I ended up going with the inset like mount that mounts basically to the edge of the cabinet. This means that I'm gonna have to add some blocking to most of the cabinets. There's only one cabinet where this will work without the blocking, but I just liked it better for reasons that I liked it better that way. So that's why I went ahead and went with these particular hinges. Ooh! It's stink bug season. They are everywhere and they love to kamikaze dive on my head. I don't know what it is. So I used some scrap pieces of wood to cut some little blocks to put inside the cabinet and screwed those in. And this is why I like to keep all my little wood scraps, because there's always a little use for them. Things like that, they work out great. So now I'm just gonna use my Craig jig. It's a little hinge jig that I bought. Craig, actually, I've used a lot of their products. They make some really great products for woodworking and highly recommend them. Not sponsored. They have no idea who I am, but I really have used their products so much in the process of making these cabinets, and they've made a lot of things a lot easier. So now I just need to drill the holes for the hinges to sit in. They're just like little circles that the hinges kind of sit flush in. Screw those in, and then I'm gonna try to install them on the cabinets and see how it goes. One other thing that I'm gonna have to address is the clearance around the edge of the door. So I'm gonna have a 3/32 inch approximately clearance around the door. So like a little gap around all of the doors where they sit inside of the cabinet. And that also means along the bottom. So I think the hardest part about lining these up is gonna be getting that clearance at the bottom. But these hinges also have little screws that you can kind of adjust to, you know, adjust the clearance around the edge of the cabinet, get it just so. So that's, I think, gonna help me out a little bit, but only time will tell. We're just gonna have to start installing these things and see how it goes. Okay. All right, so I went ahead and just hung all the doors, except for this one in the corner. I just needed to get a different set of hinges for that because these are definitely not gonna work in that situation. But I wanted to go ahead and get these doors hung so that I could kind of see, you know, where the discrepancies were in the clearances around the doors. So a good example is this door here. This door does not want to close into the opening all the way because it's a little bit tight in this upper corner up here. So I know I'll make a note on this door to sand that down a little bit extra over there so that I can kind of get that clearance. And then most of the doors are pretty close actually. Like this one over here has a corner that I want to sand down a little bit more. So I'm just going to kind of make little notes for myself. And then that way when I do the finishing, I can kind of try to tackle those issues all at once. The hinges are not horrible to install, but they were a little bit frustrating. And one thing that really helped me a lot was this bit. My husband pulled this out for me because I was having a minor meltdown, but it just kind of holds the screw in there so that I can, you know, use one hand to hold it while I screw with the other hand, because the only problem with having a helper is that it's hard for them to hold it exactly where you want it to be held. So anyway, that really helped a lot. All right, I got a few supplies to help me with this. Got some Bondo to help build up one particular area that the frame was kind of a little bit off. So I'm gonna try some Bondo. I've never used this product before, but we'll give it a shot and see if it works. I only really need just a little bit of it. It's not out here right now, but I also got some caulk just to kind of get in the crevices where that 1/4 inch panel meets the frame of each of these doors and drawer fronts. I got a little sanding block. I really like these little sanding blocks. They're actually really handy. I use them quite a lot. So I've got a few things here to kind of help me get these doors in great condition before I paint everything. Before I removed the doors, I went through and just numbered each of the doors so that I can kind of keep track of everything. And for the hinges for each door, I'll probably use some like blue painter's tape and take the hinges off, label those with the corresponding door top and bottom hinge. I've already kind of made some adjustments to those, so when I put them back in, they should hopefully fit just right with minor adjustment needed. I would love to end this weekend by finishing the cabinets that I have built so far. I still have some other cabinet parts to build, but those will come later. Right now, I'm just really focused on getting these cabinets finished, the ones that I have in there. The countertops should be here in 3 to 5 weeks. It's a very big delivery window. I'm hoping it's sooner rather than later because it would be so nice to finally have countertops in there. This kitchen project has just been taking up so much brain space for me and has been such a big job. I really enjoy doing it, but it's also one of those things I'm like so ready to get it done and just kind of see the fruits of my labor and have a kitchen that feels finished. So anyway, we're gonna have a good weekend. We're gonna have a good weekend. We're gonna have a good weekend. On this particular cabinet door, one of the stiles was just a little bit short, like less than a 32nd of an inch. So I'm going to use some Bondo to build up that area. Ooh, that is strong. Oh my gosh. This stuff is so stinky. Even outside, it was overpowering almost. So I followed the instructions to mix the filler and the hardening agent, and this stuff hardens pretty quickly, so you have to work kind of fast. And since I'm working with a pretty small area, this wasn't a big issue at all. And then I just applied this Bondo pretty thickly to that corner to build up the edge and make it flush with the rail of the cabinet frame. And it's okay if it's not perfect because I'm going to be sanding this down later to make it nice and smooth. And that was the only door that really needed to be built up anywhere. The rest of the doors just needed to be sanded down at some of the corners that were a little bit too high. This was basically just shaving off a little bit at a time, and I was checking my measurements pretty frequently to make sure that I got it just right. This door in particular was giving me a lot of trouble and still would not close all the way, so I decided to get a little more aggressive and used my circular saw to shave off the edge. I'm really not trimming off much at all, like maybe a 32nd to a 16th of an inch, but I figured this would be quicker than trying to sand it down. And the amount that I shaved off wasn't even noticeable on the frame. After about 30 minutes, I came back to the cabinet that I had added Bondo to sand it down and make it really nice and smooth. Since I'm painting these cabinets, it doesn't matter that I use Bondo. If these were stained cabinets, I'd have to be a little more creative with how I built up that area or just be a little more precise when I was putting the cabinets together. Once I had all of the cabinets adjusted, I could remove the hardware and prep them for primer and paint. I started by filling all of the cracks and little holes in the frames, and I was using this product called Painter's Putty at first, and this is not what I thought it was at all. It did not work great, so I switched over to wood filler to fill all those little gaps, and that was just much easier to use, made a lot more sense. Doing this step just makes the final painted cabinet doors look so much more professional. It kind of hides any super obvious gaps or holes in these frames. Once the wood filler was dry, I could go in and sand everything down really nice and smooth. Alan jumped in at this point to help this process go a little bit faster. He worked on sanding down all the doors, and then I would take the doors, wipe them down really well with a tack cloth to get all the extra dust off, and then I used caulk to fill the gaps around the edge of the face frame where it meets the 1/4 inch plywood. I don't want the caulk to be super visible, I just want it to fill that little gap, so I'm using a putty knife to kind of scrape off the excess here. I also use the caulk to conceal any obvious gaps in the cabinet boxes. Once this is painted, you won't even be able to tell. The next day, Alan and I worked on lightly sanding the edges of that caulk just to make sure that it wasn't visible through the paint. Then we were finally ready to start priming and painting these doors and drawer fronts. We started with priming, and Alan did all the cutting in with a brush, and then I finished them off with a roller. While those dried, I worked on priming the cabinets. Then once all the primer dried, I was ready to add the first coat of paint to the cabinets and the drawers and door fronts. I chose the color Fennel Seed by Behr. I really loved this kind of muted green olivey color, and I chose it in a semi-gloss finish that's going to be really durable and easy to clean. All right, I've basically been painting all day and I'm getting kind of tired. It's kind of toward the end of the day. I'm getting a little hungry. I'm going to call it a day, but I have to say I'm really excited about this paint color. I went back and forth a lot about whether or not I wanted to go with this paint. I was worried it was going to be too dark, but I think it's actually going to work out pretty nicely. I really want this kitchen to feel lived in. I want it to have a little bit of a vintage feel, but not, you know, old-fashioned, I guess. I think it does have kind of a nice mid-century vibe to it, even though not all of my decor is going to be mid-century. I do like some of those mid-century touches, and I think this green color is going to be really nice for that. I've still got some panels out here that need to be painted with the first coat. These behind me need to be painted on the other side, and they need a second coat. I've already started painting in the kitchen. I got the upper cabinets first coat on, and I think I'm gonna take a break because I'm getting tired, but I'm really happy with the color. And so glad that we're finally painting these things. Oh my gosh. I am also planning to fill all of these holes. I'm kind of debating on how exactly I want to do that. So this one will be nice and smooth at some point, but I wanted to go ahead and just paint it. Same thing for the end of this cabinet. I'm just gonna go ahead and paint it just because I want to see it painted. I got all of the cabinets painted, and most of the doors are also painted. Well, they're all painted, but I have to put a second coat on a few of the doors. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and start installing the doors and drawer fronts, and then for some of the cabinet doors that need to be painted with a second coat, I'm just gonna paint them once they are up on the cabinets. I think that'll just be easier, because one thing about this paint, it is like a semi-gloss paint, and I think it'll probably take a few days for it to fully cure, even though it is dry. But when it leans up against things, it gets a little tacky. So I don't really want to be laying it on the table to paint and everything. I'm just gonna go ahead and get it up in the cabinet. When I was painting the doors, I did go through and renumber them in the little holes for the hardware, just because I painted over the door numbers. So I did kind of keep myself organized that way, and hopefully installing these will not be that big of an issue at all. For the drawer front, I have some double-sided carpet tape that I'm gonna use to stick the drawer front on the front of the drawer, and then that way I can kind of pull it out and screw it in from the back without it shifting around. And I need to create a little bit of that reveal around all four edges of the drawer fronts. I think I'm just gonna try to use shims to do that, and just kind of get them in there, position the door so that I can kind of maintain that spacing. And then I'll screw those into the drawer boxes. This morning, I spent a little time installing all of the hardware. I decided to go with this sort of antique copper hardware. I thought it would look really nice with the green color. It also picks up a little bit of a pink undertone in our floors, and I think it just pairs really nicely with those colors. Eventually, I would like to switch out our faucet for something that's kind of an antique copper. We do have a little drink faucet, like a filtered water faucet, that we're gonna have once we get the countertops installed, that is also kind of that copper color. And to make the hardware installation go a little bit faster, I created a couple of little jigs for myself. So I created one that would be for the knobs on all of the doors, kind of on that corner position on the doors. And then I also created a jig for the pulls and the knobs that would be on the drawers. So that just made it easier so that I'm not having to go through and measure over and over and over again. I just found the center of each of the drawers, lined up the jig with that, and drilled the holes for the knobs on the drawers and the pulls on the drawers. And that did make it go by pretty fast. It only took me maybe an hour hour and a half to install all of the hardware. And that just reduces the margin of error for measuring each one individually. So definitely recommend making a jig. I have not created doors or a little apron front here for the sink cabinet because we are gonna have to make some adjustments to our sink position when they install the countertops, and I just wanted to leave that completely open and wait until we know for sure how all that's gonna be laid out. I'll also link in the description the hardware that I used. I just got it on Amazon. There are actually a lot of places to find hardware online. Etsy was another place that I was looking at. At first I was thinking I might do those cup pulls on the drawers. I really like the look of that, and a lot of the inspiration images that I had on Pinterest had those cup pulls. But the more I looked at them, especially in that antique copper color, I just felt like they were too big and drew too much attention. And I liked the antique look of those, but I just wanted to go with something just a little bit daintier. And so I'm really happy with these pulls. They have that sort of antique vibe that I'm going for. They're not so large that they kind of take over the aesthetic of the cabinets. I also got a light. So I got this industrial looking light from Home Depot, and they had several different colors, and I went ahead and got the green because I thought the green on green would be kind of cool in here. And this light is gonna go above the sink here. There was already an electrical cable going there for an over the sink light that was there previously. So I made sure to preserve that. The only thing is, I don't think we have a switch to that light. And I think that the light that was in there before was possibly had a switch on the light or maybe a pull chain, and I can't exactly remember. We could do a couple of things. So we could install a switch and just kind of connect to the electrical that's already there and kind of make a channel in the wall and put a switch in the wall. That's one option that we could do. And I don't think that that would be too terribly complicated to do. Another option that we have that would be a lot easier to do is just to get one of those light bulbs that is a remote control, kind of like a smart light bulb that I could just put in here, and it either has a remote control or a switch with it that I could possibly install in the wall somehow. That's another workaround. And then another option is to install a pull chain on this. And so today we're gonna go to Home Depot and kind of take a look around, see what options they have for that. And there's a part of me that wants to permanently hardwire it to a switch in the wall, but the other part of me is well, it'd be a lot easier just to put a pull chain on it or to do a remote control switch. So anyway, we have options for that, but anyway, I thought this was just really cute, and I thought it would look really nice up here. We're also gonna have the paneling installed. We're gonna work on that this weekend, hopefully. Get the paneling installed around the window, and then I would be able to also paint, install the light, and our kitchen would be getting closer and closer to being finished. But if I'm being honest, we still have a really long way to go before the kitchen's gonna be finished. But we're getting closer, and it's feeling more like a kitchen every day. That weekend, we worked on installing the rest of the paneling that goes behind the kitchen sink. And this is the rest of the paneling that we are putting in this kitchen. And it feels good to have all of that old wall covered up. I also caulked the seams between the panels, filled all of the holes that were left from using the nail gun, sanded those down, and then painted this paneling to match the rest of the kitchen. We also went ahead and got the light fixture installed, and we're gonna figure out what we're gonna do with the switch, but I just wanted to see it up here on the wall. And the last thing that I did was add trim to the kitchen window. I wanted to do a craftsman style trim here, and I'm gonna go into a little more detail on how I did the trim in a later video because we're gonna be replacing the trim in almost every area of the house. And this trim is eventually gonna be painted. I'm still kind of debating on what color I wanna paint the trim, so I'll be painting the trim and the window casing behind it.